Stop. That cheap 6.5-inch TV might look like a deal, but it could become one of the most expensive mistakes you make in 2026. Today, we're exposing the TV brands and models with hidden flaws that flashy specs and showroom demos won't show you. Stay until the end to discover which TVs you should avoid and where your money is actually safer. If this video helps you avoid overpaying, make sure to like and subscribe for more honest TV breakdowns. And comment below, do you watch TV in a bright room or a dark cinema setup? That one detail changes everything. The red flag brands, a game of Russian roulette. Before we get into the brands you should seriously think twice about, let's establish the real problem. A cheap TV isn't always a cheap deal. Some televisions are priced low because they offer incredible value, but others are cheap because corners have been cut everywhere from the panel and processor to the software and quality control. And that's exactly why the first category on our list deserves your attention. Element, Westinghouse, and RCA. Here's where things get tricky. Names like Westinghouse and RCA once represented serious American technology and engineering, but the TVs carrying those names today are often licensed brand products. In other words, the familiar logo doesn't necessarily mean the same company is designing and building the television. Different manufacturers can produce different models under the same brand name, which can lead to huge differences in picture quality, performance, and reliability from one generation or even one model to another. And that's the biggest danger. You don't always know exactly what you're getting. An Element TV that looked surprisingly good in one review might use completely different hardware from the model sitting on a store shelf today. The same problem can apply to Westinghouse and RCA. When manufacturers are primarily focused on hitting an ultra-low price, components such as the panel, backlight, processor, speakers, and internal hardware can become areas where costs are aggressively reduced. You might save money on day one, but inconsistent quality can turn that bargain into a frustrating purchase later. So, if you see one of these brands heavily discounted, don't automatically assume you've discovered a hidden gem. Westinghouse, Element, and RCA can make sense for very basic secondary TV situations, but they become much harder to recommend when you're buying a main living room television that you expect to use for years. The bigger question isn't simply, how cheap is this TV? It's, what am I sacrificing to get that price? And that question becomes even more important when we look at the individual brands. The red flag brands Westinghouse, Element, and RCA. Let's start with Westinghouse, because this is where the familiar name can create the biggest illusion of quality. The original Westinghouse legacy is undeniably impressive, but the modern TVs sold under that name should not automatically be judged by that history. The important thing is the television you're actually buying today, not the reputation the logo had decades ago. For buyers, that means paying close attention to the specific model rather than assuming the brand name guarantees premium engineering. The biggest concern is consistency and long-term reliability. Budget televisions can experience problems ranging from software glitches and failing HDMI connections to backlight issues and screen uniformity problems. And when a TV develops a serious hardware fault, the money you saved at checkout suddenly doesn't feel like much of a victory. That's why reliability matters so much. When comparing an ultra-budget television with a slightly more expensive model from a stronger manufacturer. Then we have Element and RCA, two names that generally compete near the bottom of the TV market. Their biggest selling point is obvious: price. You can often find very large screens for surprisingly little money, which makes them tempting for bedrooms, garages, guest rooms, dorms, or situations where you simply need a basic screen. But the low price can come with compromises in brightness, contrast, viewing angles, processing, speakers, and overall responsiveness. And here's the key distinction. Not every cheap TV is automatically bad, but the cheaper you go, the more carefully you need to inspect the hardware behind the logo. If you're buying a secondary TV that gets occasional use, these brands may be worth considering when the price is extremely low. But if this is the television your family will watch every night for the next several years, saving an extra $100 may not be worth sacrificing picture quality, software performance, and peace of mind. And that's exactly why the next brand deserves a closer look: Insignia. Insignia, when cheap looks better than it really is. Now let's talk about Insignia, because this one can be especially tempting when you're shopping at Best Buy. You'll often see Insignia TVs positioned aggressively with attractive prices, large screen sizes, and smart features that make them look like an obvious bargain. On the surface, it can seem like you're getting everything you need for far less money. But before you click that buy button, there's one important question to ask. Where is the money being saved? The first thing to understand is that Insignia is a store brand, rather than a traditional TV manufacturer with the same kind of long-standing display engineering ecosystem as Samsung, LG, or Sony. Many models use platforms such as Fire TV, which can provide a perfectly familiar smart TV experience with access to popular streaming services. And that's actually part of what makes these televisions attractive. The software experience can look much better on paper than the hardware underneath it. But here's the catch. A good operating system can't compensate for a mediocre display. Entry-level Insignia models can make significant compromises in areas like brightness, contrast, motion handling, viewing angles, speakers, and image processing. The TV may display 4K content and support HDR, but that doesn't automatically mean you'll get impressive HDR performance. If the panel can't get bright enough or produce strong contrast, those impressive specifications become much less meaningful in everyday viewing. So, who should consider an Insignia? If you need an inexpensive TV for a bedroom, guest room, garage, kitchen, or occasional use, it can potentially make sense, especially when heavily discounted. But if you're shopping for the centerpiece of your living room, the television you'll use for movies, sports, gaming, and everyday streaming, I'd be much more selective. The problem isn't that every Insignia is guaranteed to fail. It's that the savings can come with compromises you notice every single day. And now we're moving into an even more interesting category. Brands that aren't necessarily bad, but can become very risky when you choose the wrong model. Buyer beware, Toshiba, Philips, Vizio, and Hisense. Now, we move into a much more complicated category. The buyer beware brands. These aren't brands I'd automatically tell you to avoid because some of them actually produce excellent TVs. The problem is that their lineups can vary dramatically from one model to another. You can find a genuinely impressive television at the top of the range, while a cheaper model carrying the exact same logo can deliver a completely different experience. And that's where shoppers get caught. Take Toshiba and Philips in the U.S. market. Both names have enormous historical recognition, which can create an assumption that you're buying the same kind of engineering that made these brands famous. But modern licensing and manufacturing arrangements mean you need to look at the specific TV rather than relying on the name alone. A familiar logo can sit on hardware designed primarily around a low price, and the result can be a television that looks impressive on the box but feels underpowered once you actually start using it. This is especially noticeable with processing and software performance. A TV might run Google TV or Fire TV and give you access to thousands of apps, but that doesn't mean the hardware underneath is powerful enough to deliver a consistently smooth experience. If the processor is weak, menus can feel sluggish, apps can take longer to open, and multitasking becomes frustrating. Picture processing can suffer too, particularly when you're watching lower-resolution cable, older movies, or compressed streaming content that needs serious upscaling. Then there's Vizio and Hisense, where the story gets even more interesting. Their better models can offer outstanding value, particularly in the mid-range and upper mid-range categories, but their cheapest models are where you need to be careful. A Vizio V-Series or entry-level Hisense may advertise 4K, HDR, Dolby Vision, and smart features, but the actual panel performance can be dramatically weaker than what you get from their more expensive lines. So the rule here is simple. Don't judge the entire brand, judge the specific model. If you're buying Vizio or Hisense, moving up from their cheapest offerings can make a huge difference. And in the next part, we'll look at exactly why their entry-level TVs can become such a frustrating trap. Vizio and Hisense, when the specs look better than the TV. Here's where the spec sheet trap becomes especially dangerous. A budget TV can advertise almost every modern buzzword you want to see. 4K UHD, HDR, Dolby Vision, smart features, and even gaming support. On paper, that sounds impressive. But specifications only tell you what a TV can accept. They don't necessarily tell you how good the final picture will actually look. And that's where some entry-level Vizio and Hisense models can disappoint. Take Vizio's entry-level V-Series. The appeal is obvious. You can often get a large screen with modern connectivity and gaming-related features without spending flagship money. But lower-end models have historically faced criticism around software responsiveness, picture processing, and quality consistency. When the TV takes too long to open an app, freezes unexpectedly, or struggles with motion and lower quality content, those impressive specifications suddenly don't feel nearly as valuable. Hisense has a similar situation with its A6 series entry-level models. Hisense's higher-end U-series televisions can deliver incredible brightness, mini LED technology, strong gaming performance, and impressive value. But you shouldn't assume those strengths automatically carry over to the cheapest TVs in the lineup. Entry-level panels can be noticeably weaker in brightness and contrast, while processing and motion handling may also take a step backward. The result is a TV that technically checks the right boxes but doesn't necessarily deliver the exciting picture you expected. And that's the lesson you should take away from both brands. Don't buy the cheapest model simply because the brand has a few highly rated TVs. If you're interested in Vizio or Hisense, research the exact model, panel type, brightness, processing performance, and long-term software experience before spending your money. Sometimes spending a little more gets you dramatically better hardware, and that's often the difference between saying, "I got an amazing deal," and saying, "I should have spent another $150. But now we're getting to the part that may surprise you most. Even Samsung, LG, and Sony have TVs you should think twice about. The disappointments from the big three. Now we're getting to the part that could save you the most money, because this is where brand loyalty can become a trap. Samsung, LG, and Sony are responsible for some of the best TVs you can buy, but that doesn't mean every television carrying their logo deserves your money. In fact, their cheapest models can sometimes be surprisingly disappointing when compared with stronger mid-range TVs from other brands. Let's start with Samsung. The company makes spectacular OLED and Neo QLED televisions, but its entry-level Crystal UHD lineup is a completely different story. Models such as the CU7000 and CU8000 series are designed primarily around affordability, and that means compromises can show up in areas that matter. Brightness is one of the biggest concerns. A TV can technically support HDR, but if it can't get bright enough, HDR content won't have the dramatic highlights and contrast you expect. And there's another problem. The Samsung name can make a mediocre TV feel like a premium product. When shoppers see the logo, they may assume they're automatically getting the same quality found in Samsung's expensive models. But the display technology, local dimming capability, brightness, and overall picture performance can be worlds apart. Depending on the specific model and size, connectivity can also be limited compared with what you might expect from a premium TV. In other words, you're sometimes paying extra for the brand without getting the performance that made the brand famous. So before buying a budget Samsung, don't ask, "Is Samsung a good TV brand?" That's the wrong question. Ask, "Is this specific Samsung model actually better than the alternatives at this price?" Because if a cheaper TCL, Hisense, or another mid-range competitor delivers significantly higher brightness, stronger contrast, better gaming features, or superior local dimming, the Samsung logo alone isn't enough to justify the extra money. And Samsung isn't the only premium name where this happens. LG has a similar problem at the bottom of its lineup, LG's entry-level trap. Now let's move on to LG, because this is where buyers can easily get confused. LG has built an incredible reputation around OLED, and for good reason. The company's premium OLED televisions are among the most impressive displays available. But here's the mistake. Assuming that every LG TV delivers an OLED-like experience. The reality is that LG's entry-level LED models can be dramatically different from its premium lineup. A good example is the LG UR series, where certain sizes and configurations can use panel technologies that prioritize viewing angles over contrast. That might sound like a small technical difference, but it can completely change the experience in a dark room. Instead of deep, convincing blacks, darker scenes can appear gray or washed out, especially when there's no effective local dimming to improve contrast. And if you're someone who watches a lot of movies at night, this is exactly the kind of weakness you'll notice again and again. The frustrating part is that WebOS can still make the TV feel premium. Look for a platform with strong app support and ongoing updates, and make sure the TV has enough HDMI ports for your setup. Ideally, you want multiple HDMI connections, with at least one supporting eARC for a soundbar, and enough high-bandwidth connectivity if you're planning to use modern gaming consoles. Get these fundamentals right, and you'll be far less likely to fall for a TV that looks like a bargain on the shelf but becomes a disappointment at home. The final conclusion. So, after everything we've covered, here's the biggest lesson. Don't buy a TV based solely on the logo, the screen size, or the number of features printed on the box. Ultra-budget licensed brands like Element, Westinghouse, and RCA can be tempting when the price looks unbelievably low, but the potential compromises in hardware, processing, software, and consistency can make that bargain much less attractive over time. If you're buying a TV you'll use every day for years, reliability and real-world performance should matter more than saving the last few dollars. For brands like Vizio and Hisense, the answer isn't necessarily to avoid them completely. In fact, some of their better mid-range and premium models can offer exceptional value. The key is knowing where their lineups become worthwhile. Don't assume the cheapest model carries the same technology found in the highly praised models. Research the exact TV, check its brightness, contrast, panel technology, processing, gaming features, and real-world reviews before making your decision. And perhaps the most important lesson is this. Even Samsung, LG, and Sony aren't automatically safe choices at every price point. Their flagship and premium models can be fantastic, but their cheapest televisions may involve compromises that make competing mid-range models a better purchase. A famous logo doesn't guarantee a great picture. What matters is what's actually inside the television and how that hardware performs in your room. So before you buy your next TV, slow down and look beyond the marketing. Check the real HDR performance, processing quality, panel technology, smart platform, HDMI connectivity, and long-term value. The goal isn't to find the cheapest TV or even the TV with the longest feature list. It's to find the television that gives you the best overall experience for the money. And now you know exactly what warning signs to look for and what questions to ask before you spend your hard-earned cash.